Hello and welcome to part 3 of the TSSI series. Today we have a good few people on the call. First, I want to thank the new Patreon subscribers, Toby K, Simon B, Amitai A, and Jack G, and the new PayPal once-off donation from longtime listener Michael T. Okay, everybody, who do we have in the house? Who wants to go first?
Hey, it's Lexi.
Lexi. I always go to you first.
Hey, it's Pouya.
Hey.
We have, Pouya is a long-time listener from Alpha to Omega and a recent donator to the Swampside chats.
Yeah, that's why we had the Grossman episode, which was awesome. So thanks for that.
It is awesome. I want to read that book now because it sounds very interesting. Pouya, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, I'm Pouya. I'm currently a student studying neuroscience, and I'm reading, Reclaiming Marx's Capital.
Very good. Who else do we have? We've got Emmanuel here. Can I say what I'm going to do an attempt at your pronouncing your show from Infuluretsak. What was that like, Emmanuel?
It was closer than the Swedish chef would have pronounced it.
Bork.
It's close enough. It's en förlorad sak. So you did a pretty good job there. I also need to say that we also have a Simon B to thank for signing up to our Patreon. I hope maybe it's the same guy. In that case, hi Simon. Thanks for supporting us.
Absolutely, shed the wealth. Now, who else? Oh, and we've got Rosa as well. Rosa
Janice from Swampside, the worst person on Swampside. Yeah, that's continuing the long tradition of screwing up intros.
Who said that?
And Rosa has just lost her wallet. Do you want to tell us all about that?
Yeah, a fun situation. I was taking the subway home and just lost my wallet and my temporary state ID and my school ID. So it's okay. Like, school ID is like $5. It was like a card wallet, and I don't really have any like credit cards or anything like that. And just had like a temporary state ID. So I'm getting an actual state ID in like a few weeks, I guess.
Very good. Now, I'm eating an orange, which I shouldn't be. Okay. So last week we went through chapter 2.1, finished chapter 2.1, and we will probably want to do chapter 2.2 today, maybe a little of chapter 3. Now, we have a couple of things maybe that we would like to talk and discuss from, maybe go over a few clarifications or stuff from the previous episode. Maybe, Pouya, would you like to start? Because you hit me up and were interested in coming on and partaking in this episode because you wanted to talk a little bit about what is it? Henryk Grossman's breakdown theory that you think you might have got slightly wrong or whatever.
Yeah, thanks, Seth.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, maybe I wanted to explain his theory and how he arrives at it and what its implications are and what kind of empirical trends we might tend to see if it is true. And so Grossman, I guess he starts off with Bauer's reproduction schemes, Otto Bauer, and he produced these schemes in response to Rosa Luxemburg and her theory on capitalist accumulation. And so Bauer's schemes are basically Marxist schemes, expanding reproduction schemes from Volume 2 with increasing organic composition. Every year we have he starts off with the assumption that capital, there's a rate of surplus value of 100%, and that the surplus value is then reinvested. So we have a rate of accumulation of 10% in constant capital, and then a rate of accumulation of variable capital of 5%. And he basically goes through these the 2-department schemes with proportional accumulation in each department. And so what he sees is that there is not a problem of realization, but he only goes through these schemes for 4 years. And in these 4 years, there is not enough time, or you don't see any barriers to accumulation. There's no absolute barriers to the process of accumulation. So what Grossman does is that he extends these schemes. He extends these schemes to year 35 for 35 years.
So he manually does all these calculations and looks at the trend to do that.
Like it's very like the expanding reproduction schemes in volume 2, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you could get them on Marxist.org if you look up Henryk Grossman and breakdown.
Okay.
So what did we fuck up on, Pouya? What did we...
I don't want to get into a 2-hour discussion of breakdown theory because it was only kind of in passing. But if you want to hit the point that we thought that we messed up or we didn't represent correctly.
Okay. Well, Rosa, you read Grossman, right?
Lexi did, I think.
Lexi and Rosa, yeah.
Sorry. I forgot Rosa. Lexi, you read Grossman, right? So,
what did I fuck up on?
What did you think Grossman was saying when he got to the breakdown, right? He assumed that there were cyclical variations due to counteracting tendencies, right?
Right.
Did you assume that he said that there was going to be a protracted period of breakdown, or that the accumulation phase is, he determined it mathematically, right? Given these variables.
Yeah, look, I don't know exactly what I said, but I can tell you what I think, and you can tell me if it's wrong. So, like you're saying, it's an imminent critique of this guy's models. I forget the guy who's responding to Luxembourg. Is it Otto Bauer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the long term, there has to be like a crisis in accumulation. Fuck, that totally doesn't answer your question. Like,
did you think he was saying that because there's points where he says, the breakdown period is indeterminate and can last. It's not determinate. You can't determine it mathematically like you can the accumulation phase.
I guess I didn't think about this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if whether or not he's saying that there can be cyclical variations, and we only empirically see cyclical variations, but there can still be, protracted depressions, which produce objectively revolutionary conditions.
I mean, I thought that's the whole point. Yes, Dan. So now that I understand your question, I kind of figured that the whole point is it hits this kind of crisis that's worse than a business cycle. Like,
or the downswing in the business cycle is not.
Well, not even worse than the business cycle. Not even like an event like the Great Depression that necessitates a Keynesian, like a whole shift in policy, but like something basically deeper, like something like what, I don't know, like when you look at long-term trends in accumulation and you kind of notice that we're sort of like, there's no new China. There's a lot of stuff about this in like finance news. There's no new place for that kind of investment that has that concentrated a population and hasn't been marketized. So it's coming from this intuition that there may eventually just run out of things to accumulate. and you're kind of like things will stagnate and crash because it relies on growth.
Can anybody see what I have on the screen there? We have this is from one of Esteban Maito's papers on the falling rate of profit in all these different countries, and he's grouped them together here. All the core countries, I presume the major capitalists. I think the 7 or 8 of them he picks. I mean, he might have actually done more. He might have done like 11 or 12. But you can see there over the long term. This is from 1869 to 2010. You can see the general trajectory is down. And as he has made best fit, I presume, regression best fit line at each of the years, you can see of 1900, 1919, 1932, and so on and so forth. And you can see he is basically doing he seems to be some type of breakdown theorist where he's predicting over long term where the falling rate of profit is going to make it go all the way to zero. Now, we can see there between the 1920s, we see a big drop in up until 1945, a big gain in this. So like that's the kind of the counter-cyclical tendencies that Andrew Kleinman what Marx would talk about. But nonetheless, we see this overall sequence going down. And like this to me is kind of what haven't read Grossman, but from what I get from what who I've talked to people about, I think I've asked either Kleiman, I think I've asked Brendan Cooney about him, and I might have asked Michael Roberts. I definitely asked one of them three about it. I think it was Kleiman and maybe Michael Roberts. And I think Kleiman said that he wasn't really determinist. He wasn't saying, the whole thing was going to break down. But I could have that entirely wrong. I can't remember. So don't quote me on that.
I don't think he's a determinist in the sense that the economic conditions, just cause the human action. Like the proletariat has to have its shit together in order to make the final crisis something that isn't just collapse into barbarism, more or less.
Yeah, well, fair enough. But I think people like sometimes people are saying. Sorry, go ahead, Pouya.
I think this is the point.
I think that the part about we need I think Marxian just science needs a theory which explains human behavior in terms of their conditions, because we're supposed to explain the world in terms of matter, right, and its movements.
Yeah, but the whole the victorious side of dialectical materialism is the anti-reductionist side, which sort of
correct
understands that even despite whatever the general dynamics are of one system, once it reaches a level of complexity, it can develop new laws, one might want to say. It's to the point where laws become something very local to systems. And so I do think human beings are sufficiently complex where economic determination really calls the shots for for most of the contours of what you can do. But within that there's a lot of variation for a lot of reasons.
Sure. One thing I liked about Mendel, I read his book on long waves, and in it he does a correlational thing between long waves and the development of class struggle. And he kind of wants to take the subjectivist route as well. But
am I taking a subjectivist route? Is what I'm saying that economics don't basically determine the structures of choice? Because I think that's really not that's
there. I would think the way to say it would be they are a determining factor, but not the sole determining factor.
They're even a primary determining factor for just what the playing field is, what the character select screen looks like, what the choices are. That is so not arbitrary. That is that is means, and people's choices within that mean so much to them. But that's a huge determinant.
I don't think.
Sorry, go ahead, Rosa.
I don't think Marx would be as invested in politics as he was throughout his life. if like the sort of economic factors like a hard breakdown would ultimately lead to communism, as a lot of liberals claim. Like that's usually a claim that's made by like liberals just like butchering capital, is that like Marx predicted like all the people would get poor and that would cause revolution. And since all the people aren't getting poor, it's a middle class rise, then there hasn't been a capitalist breakdown, then Marx was wrong. And obviously that's a really horrible straw man. I don't even know where these people get that from, honestly. But
I think that's in the manifesto.
Well,
But-
it
But I
is a
think it changed
tendency
his
in
thought.
it is a tendency in Marxism that was like important. People thought of the immiseration thesis as being like the heart of Marxism. Something that like endnotes like kind of is reviving. Actually, it's like,
I
hey,
mean-
you notice the trends
I
in
mean,
surplus population
yeah,
kind of looks like the immiseration thesis, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, Kaurokotsky thought that the proletariat was going to get larger in size, but I don't think that's necessary. Immiseration
No, I
would be improvement
guys,
in the standards of living.
I'm terribly
We're-
sorry, but
we're
I
way
have
the fuck
no
off.
idea what you guys are talking about.
We're way the fuck off. Let's
Yeah,
move
we're
on.
way-
I have
We're-
zero idea what's going on.
I would
let's
like to
give the
make
last
one
word
more.
to Pouya. Yeah, let's
Okay.
give the last word to Pouya.
I'm saying that maybe not an immiseration theory is necessary, but one that links people's actual conditions with their behavior. Because I mean, if you look at just modern neuroscience, this idea that subjectivity produces behavior is just like, there was a study by Labat in where he did EEG analysis of potentials in the brain, so like activity in your brain and your the area that causes motor action, and he found that the subjectivity arised after the after the fact. So I think it's
Yeah,
important
but
to
that's-
have this like maybe like a just one that can predict behavior as a function of conditions, and maybe these economic conditions are just as part of the like Lexi said, this is I think maybe it's a very important determining part, but
If
maybe
this was that
isn't
easy,
it.
if this was that easy to do, social science would be very different. And that's the last thing I'm going to say about this.
Yeah, and I think also, like why we wouldn't need to have loads of people and we wouldn't have to go on to like dating websites. We wouldn't need to look through millions of people. We just have an algorithm and they just pick out your love for life.
Well, my conditions match this. Like, like this conditionally works. Like, all right.
It's the problem of complexity. But like, let's just get on. Let's get back. Sorry, we've got to go in about 10 or 15 minutes there, and we're getting abuse in the chat room. So we're gonna have to.
All right.
Get back to.
I have to join this chat room.
As we should.
Yeah,
like I have
we're
no
not
idea
even
what
talking about the
evisceration
book.
theory is or what any of this is about. I have read Henryk Grossman, guys, and
You have?
I'm also reading the paper that you have on the screen currently, and I still have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Yeah,
Okay.
this has nothing to do with the book.
Yes, let's keep
going.
Let's talk about
Okay. Okay, one thing I wanted to say before we started was with respect to the table that was giving Emmanuel orgasms when it was showing the different rates of profit. Yeah. So let me just find it here and put it on the screen so people can see it. Let me find it 1 second. Here we go. Let's have a look. So we're talking about this table right here, where the equalization of profits rates occurred, even though surplus was different in the chemical and the restaurant industry. Now, one thing Derek was going on a lot about, IP and rents. And one thing I thought we should probably mention here was that you do not need a rent for this to really work. The famous example from classical economics was the problem they had was, well, originally what was called the transformation problem was understanding why, if the same amount of labor goes into a bottle of wine as the same amount of labor goes into a loaf of bread, that the bread would sell for cheaper than the bottle of wine. And this was because Marx solved it. His idea of solving it was because the wine had to sit in the cellar for a couple of years, and the winemaker would have to be compensated for leaving his capital sitting around for so long. So in that instance, we can see maybe the chemical and the restaurant industry might operate on that exact basis, whereby it's not really a rent, but a compensation for capital invested over long hauls. So that's just what? Who's
Yeah,
Manuel?
that's me. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Go on, give me some abuse there.
Yes, no, you're entirely right about Marx's account of why wine sells for a higher price than a loaf of bread, even though the same amount of labor goes into it. But Marx's point there is that the wine has a higher cost of production. That's not what this table is about. What this table says is that the total price return on profit, or the total rate of profit in price terms and the total rate of profit in value terms must be equal. And if they're equal, the main determinant of your actual profits is the amount of capital invested, not necessarily the cost of production. Because on this table, you see the restaurant industry has a cost of production K of 30, while the chemical industry has a K of 40. So it's not K that determines your profit pie. It's the amount of capital originally invested. So
you're dead right. Yeah, you're dead right there. I wasn't saying it more so specifically about this example, but just in general. But you're dead right. In this example here, the cost prices are quite similar, so that wouldn't explain the changes in the rate of profit between the two.
But like you're entirely right in your account. It's just not necessarily applicable in this exact case.
Exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to make it plain for people like Derek who were wondering about what could be going on. But in this case, case here, what I'm saying is not really true. Maybe a little bit of what is going on is with respect to the cost price, and then most of it's just with an equalization of profit rates in the economy.
Exactly.
One thing that's interesting about technological commodities such as Windows is that when you see the ones that don't have intellectual property, such as Linux, you can go on the Ubuntu website and just download a file of Linux for free, or of Ubuntu. And
you can download Windows as well. I mean,
oh really?
There was I don't know if
Pirate Bay is for.
Well, no. Like legitimately, like I don't know if this is still the case, but like for instance, Microsoft was trying to get people to upgrade to Windows. What was it? Like past to Windows 7 from XP, for instance, and they had to like give Windows 7 away to make that happen. Basically,
they're still giving away Windows 10, by the way.
For the same reason.
Yeah, no, it's not free for anyone, but for people with handicaps or disabilities. So there's a secret link on the Microsoft webpage that if you Google like Microsoft for the differently abled or whatever, they're going to give you a free Windows 10 upgrade, no strings attached and no questions asked, from Windows 7. So it's still available, though no one talks about it. The core point is software is essentially free to reproduce.
Yeah. But who would want Windows 10?
Okay, very good. Can we move on?
Yeah.
Or maybe you want to say anything?
No, I'm good.
Let's keep it going. Okay, so we also had in the last few weeks we've had privately some discussions between Lexi and Dave Zachariah on his opinions about the melt, and I've also had concomitant discussions with Kleiman about Dave Zachariah's and the Econophysics School's critique of the melt, and they were long and went on quite a lot. I think that it's too much to put into the show. But let me just say that I think that we don't have any problems after going through that discussion with the melt, and that we don't see that the arguments of the econophysics kind of group to do with the melt are really valid. Am I being correct there? Do we want to go into it any more than that?
The one I'll say this is that I feel like that they're doing a different thing. That they have a kind of interest in sort of trying to predict prices of production in a sort of Ricardian way. And maybe I'm not getting this right, but that it seems kind of different than what I understand Marx's economics to be doing.
I was not, I wasn't present for these conversations between David and Zachariah, but I had read a lot of the book Classical Econophysics by Cockshott and Cortrell and Wright and Yakovenko. And I was actually extremely confused by that. They do it like Adam Smith does, where he divides the price by the average wage, correct?
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they also take I think it's the integrated labor, the vertically integrated labor coefficient, and then they also divide that by the price of labor. But I was really confused by this because I thought, the average wage can fluctuate depending on the productivity of labor. Like, wouldn't this, it makes more sense to relate the value added to labor values than the average wage. And I was so confused. And I was so confused by this method that they used that I just I didn't finish the book. I just sat there and thought about it for like a week. I was like, I was so confused by this.
Whereas the melt kind of makes intuitive sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say a very short thing about the discussion that Ulysses had with Dave Zachariah. And basically, to me, what it boils down to is that he refers to two critics of the TSSI. And hopefully we can get to sort of the main critics of the TSSI sometime. But their names are Simon Mohun and Roberto Veneziani. And they've published a bunch of papers against Kleiman and Freeman, arguing that the TSSI is inconsistent and things like this. And the debate between them, between Mohun, Veneziani on the one side and Kleiman and Freeman on the other, is very long and very technical. But there is a book version out called Is Marx's Theory of Profit Right? The Simultaneous Temporalist Debate. It's available on Amazon for the true geeks out there. And it seems to me that Zachariah's response essentially boils down to him being on the Mohun Veneziani side of that debate. So I don't know, maybe in the future reading groups we can go through the main critics of the TSSI, because it seems to me that that's where he's coming from.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm totally open to those, to like investigating this more. I really want to grasp the debate more. I feel like I still don't totally understand why someone would side there. And although, what Dave said is that if you do this melt thing, you're kind of messing with, in his view, the whole point of Marxian labor values and their scientific value, which, that's hard for me to wrap my brain around. I just feel like we're doing different things, and I don't think he would agree with that.
Well, I would just like to say, some of the stuff that I was on to Andrew about it, the reason why he says that we need to use the melt, and the main reason for doing it is to be able to, in labor time value the amount of added value, the amount of value that will be transferred from the means of production to the new product. And that's what it's about.
Yes.
And
because
we don't have to think about it any more than that. Like, from my point of view, that's it. It's just a simple thing that we're going to use. I read through all of those papers that Emmanuel is talking about in that book. Well, not all of them. I read a lot, the ones that were most relevant to the discussion here. And, you know, a detailed reading of them, it's absolutely slam dunk in Kleinman's and Freeman's arguments are absolutely, it's pure savagery in those, the points are taken apart one by one. And it's hard to believe you could fall down on the side of Mohan and Veneziani, is it?
I think so too, yeah.
One thing I'm curious about is whether the melt is compatible with the stochastic labor theory of value. Like,
you know what? I think there's a Cockshot paper. I think it might be Cockshot and Zachariah, actually. I could be mistaken, where they use the TSSI values as like an alternate measure.
I've seen that.
Just to try to like demonstrate that this holds no matter what definition of labor values you're using.
I think I've seen that paper.
The other thing is, well, like, econophysics is something that I'm very interested in, the econophysics approach. And like, just one thing from general science is like, you can have two theories that approach a problem in very different ways, but they can have the same predictive qualities. It's just a function of algorithmic information theory. So it's like, we shouldn't get too bogged down if this one says this slight variant, this one says this other slight variant. We just want to get it into our heads is whether was Marx full of shit or not. Is his thing is his discussion illogical, and does it contain flaws? With all that said, I kind of think we need to jump into this before people in the chat really lose their heads. Does anybody want to start? I hope I'm not trying to shut anybody down, but I'm just trying to get started.
Hey, let's talk about the book that we're supposed to talk about.
Let's talk about the book. Okay. Who wants to start off? We're going to go into, this is the chapter 2.2. So chapter 2.1, which we've been discussing for the last show and a half, has been all the stuff that the TSI and Marx, that's the claim of the TSSI. This is what Marx said how it worked. This is what the TSI is saying how it works. Now we're going to have a look at the main competing interpretations going against that. Does anybody want to take the first lot, which are called dual system interpretations? Who's read it this week? Manuel, do you want to start? You're always crystal clear and Scandinavian.
Well, thank you for that, Tom. Well, I read it for the last discussion, so I'm going a bit from memory here, but basically,
Sorry, Emmanuel, we're just getting a bit of background noise. I think somebody might be making a cup of tea or something. Can whoever it is mute their microphone?
Derek, can you mute your mic, please? I'm kidding.
I believe it's Pouya.
Yeah.
Is it me?
It's an old Alpha to Omega meme.
Is that good?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so basically, Kleinman goes through in this chapter the different schools of interpretations that exist around how values and prices relate to each other. So he's going to start with a description of the dual system interpretations. And dual system is just a fancy word for saying that values and prices are two different things, right? So you have two costs, as it were. You have you invest your capital into a bunch of machines and a bunch of workers, and they have a socially necessary labor time attached to them that may or may not be related to what you actually pay price-wise in the market. So there's a value cost to your means of production and a value transferred from the means of production, but there is also a price of the means of production and the prices that are transferred. So there's two separate systems going on in the dual system interpretation, and he's going to go through why that is a problem. And later on in the chapter, he's also going to mention a bit about simultaneous evaluation and versus temporal evaluation. But that's basically the gist of it in 2.2.1. And
Emmanuel, can we just bring back that table that we looked at before, if one that we were talking about? So in this situation, you know, we would have two separate tables and the prices would go way out of whack with the values, because essentially, you know, you'd have a surplus rate, and then in the real world, you'd have your price rate of profit. So the two systems would just go straight out of whack, and they don't stay within themselves
exactly
as a whole.
Exactly. So that's why I thought the last table was so important, is that it showed that once we can calculate the value rate of profit, that's the same thing as the price rate of profit. They're both equal to 16%. They're both different expressions of the exact same thing. Thus, this is a single system interpretation because they're equal. A dual system interpretation would say that there is no textual support of it, or that there is logical inconsistency in claiming that they are equal. So that's sort of what dual system interpretations would be. So in dual system interpretations, having S over C and pi over C between one another in different columns would make no sense. You would have to, exactly as you say, Tom, have another table, one which shows just the values and one which just deals with prices, and you would compare the two, and that's where a lot of problems arise, according to Kleiman.
Yeah, so in that instance, you'd have one, like the restaurant, say, rate of profit would be 40% in the value one, and then in the price one, you know, it would be, you know, 16%, and they would go from there. You know, there would be two separate lumps of data that they wouldn't make any sense to deal with them in one go. Okay,
yeah,
so
if I recall, he has a table for this as well in chapter 2.2, showing exactly how dual systems work in a similar table-like manner. Can't recall on which page it is. Let me just look for it. But in the meantime, I encourage different perspectives and interpretations of this first section here.
Okay, let's have a look. Is anybody else got anything to say on this first section?
Just in general, the dual systems theories or dual systems interpretations, they seem to have some like plausibility, especially when you're thinking about like an individual firm. You know what I mean? Like, and I think the TSSI argument is that, you know, in aggregate, these things have to like not be like these rates of profit for I'm not sure if I misunderstood this, but rates of profit like between industries, value rates of profit, price rates of profit, those are going to be the same, not just, you know, throughout the economy. Is that right? Or is there room for distortions of like overall like rates of profit throughout like the manufacturing sector versus, you know, retail sector?
Sorry, say that again. Be precise now what you're asking here.
Oh, okay. In the TSSI, is it possible for the value rate of profit for an entire industry to diverge from the price rate of profit from that industry?
Yes.
Yeah.
But not in the total rate of profit. It's just the totals that are equal.
Excuse me. Okay, then I've been misspeaking. All right. Yeah, never mind. Never mind. So, okay, I guess what I'll say about this is that, like, it's not clear to me what dual systems really adds then if the TSSI already like accounts for these things.
Yeah, that's a great question, and Kleiman doesn't deal with this until chapter 3. Basically, to cut a long story short, all dual systems, according to Kleiman, if I read him correctly, come from Borkowitz, and basically him claiming that single systems don't make any sense because I say so, and I'm going to correct Marxist theory by splitting it into two systems or something like that. No, shit, that was simultaneous and temporal evaluation. I got the two mixed up.
So that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the simultaneism. So reading this book, I've pretty much always been on board that the simultaneous stuff seems, and we're going to get to that. So sorry for speaking out of out of sequence here. So, but it's right here, the dual system stuff. That stuff, I find that more understandable and like possibly permitted by the text in a way that simultaneism just seems like very vulgarly not part of the text. Like
one thing I was sorry.
Far ahead.
One thing I was always confused about when I was reading Marx, when he came to prices of production, was whether when the output of one industry, so let's say the chemical industry in the example of 2.2, is used as an input for a labor-intensive industry, and then there's the equalization of profit rates. Let's assume the same profit rate. I was wondering, will it equalize to the value? Because then they would be, let's say, right, so the value cost was 40, and then the price of production was 72. One thing that I was always curious when reading Marx was whether or not, when this 72 is used as an input for another industry, whether it equalizes with the 40 or the 72, and the single system interpretation really helped clarify some of the confusion I had with that.
Yeah,
I think,
Firehead, Manuel.
Yeah, no, I think that's really illuminating. I would just try to ask you if you could like walk us through exactly what it made you realize and how. I agree, but like.
Okay, let me find where Andrew talks about it. Okay, so page 34, single system interpretations. Andrew says, hence the amount of labor needed to produce the product is the amount of labor needed to acquire the means of production that are used up in order to produce the product. Plus, to acquire means of production, more of a firm needs to buy them at their actual price, not at their value, which might be less.
Okay, so this is very important, just in general, for all of why the splitting into dual systems is important, is because if you're keeping everything in terms of values, and the value price, if you want, I know it's a hard one, the value amount of, say, in the chemical industry would be lower than it would be in the price amount. When you use that as an input into the next round of, say, in a multi-table, in a multi-sector real economy, when that one goes into, say, the restaurant industry, maybe they're using salt from the chemical industry, and when that goes in there, it won't be in the dual system. In one, it'll go in at the value, the amount of value. Another, it goes through as the price, and they'll be two separate amounts. So all the inputs at each stage change in each step because they're not being reflected and averaged. It's not just the single price way of doing it. So they just diverge immediately. And when you think about the single system, because you can use the price and you have used the melt to switch between between the price and the value rate, you have one system. So it's always consistent. And that's very, very important, because in the real world, we're living in capitalism here. We don't go around into the shop and we don't see, oh, there's a bar of chocolate there. It's got its price is £2.21. Oh, but its labor hours is 0.3. Christ, I'll buy it with my labor hours instead. That doesn't exist in the real world. It's a single system. This idea of dual system is it's a philosophical fantasy. It's got nothing to do with the real world.
Yeah, so exactly. When the 72 is then used as an input in another industry, and let's say the profit rate, the average profit rate is still 16%. It's 16% of 72. It's
Yes.
the, yeah, it's the labor needed to acquire the means of production.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And
so
then so the amount of labor needed to acquire them is the price measured in labor time. That is their money price divided by the melt. So
Yeah. So you
Mhm.
switch between the two.
yeah, so now this price becomes the value of the input of the next industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is why the thing in the beginning of the book when Kleiman says that you have to make the value transferred by constant capital, i.e. means of production, um, related to the current cost of acquiring the means of production. This is why this is so important, because if you don't make that assumption and you just say that the value transferred by the means of production is related to the value of the means of production, you end up with a dual system interpretation. That's all it takes, is that you buy a you buy a plumbus for $100, and it produces schlieb for $10.
God damn it.
The value of the plumbus is.
You're getting muted. You're getting muted here.
All right. Okay.
Yeah,
I deserve it. I deserve it.
Forgot to use simoleons. Come on.
Okay. So one more thing. Before I think we've kind of got. Have we all got our head around the importance of, say, the melt in this situation, where it really shows us why a dual system makes no sense, and you need a melt.
You don't even need a melt. You just need the value transferred by the means of production to equal the current cost, or to be related to the current cost. You don't even really need the melt, although it's logical necessity from it is how I see it. Because
can you tease that out a bit?
Sure.
That's not right.
So
that's not right, Emmanuel, is it? You need to have a way of switching between the labor time one and the money.
Well, yes, you do, but not for these exact reasons. So,
okay, you're going to have to be extremely clear here now.
Yeah, right. So, at the end of the day, our capitalist, Mr. Moneybags, right? He is going to purchase workers for money, equal to a price of the of their labor power. He's also going to purchase means of production at the current costs, the price needed in order to acquire them, right? So the capital advanced is always measured in money terms, right? So the question then is, if say we have a composition of 60% constant capital C and 40% of the capital goes into workers' wages V. The question is, what value ends up in the output, right? So what is the new value added by all the workers, and what is the value transferred? Okay, if you make if you do the interpretation that Kleiman does, that the value transferred by the means of production is related to the current cost for acquiring the means of production, you can figure out how much value is transferred to the output. And now all you need is the general rate of profit and the actual profit measured in price terms. You only need those two, and then you can mathematically figure out what the new value added is. So there is, yes, it ends up being a melt, but you don't need that you don't need a melt sort of module plugged in to this in order to make it work. You end up with you end up with a melt in the at the end of it, but you can mathematically from table 2.2 on page 28, as long as you know the price of the means of production, and you know the general rate of profit measured in price terms, and you know the actual money, the actual prices, the actual revenue of the firms, then you can backtrack that, and you can figure out what the new value added in price terms is. And since that has to be sort of equal to the value, then you end up with a melt. But you don't need to assume a melt in order to get this to work. That's my...
Well, sorry, I think you're slightly wrong there, Emmanuel. So let me see if I can be clear on why I think you are. As in that the idea is that you're always using the melt from the previous period. So you don't need a melt on the very first period because you're just dealing with price. And then at the end of the first period, you can find out what your melt is and plug that in to find out, the labor time version of the means of production that are used in the next period. But you always need the melt from the previous one to transfer. You can't calculate from the end of this term what the previous melt was.
Yes, you can, because the value transferred by the means of production is related to the current cost of its acquisition. That's the entire point, is that in period 2, the current cost to acquire the means of production may have gone down or up. So you can keep all your temporal things needed in order to make the theory work, just essentially from that assumption.
Okay, sorry. Let me see if I could be being stupid here. Maybe we're just getting into the weeds here and we should just keep going and clarify itself in a while. But I think we'll just keep going, because it'll clarify itself in a while when you get to look at tables and you can say explicitly what's going on in your head. And it's just too confusing for we probably agree, and we're just talking around in circles at each other. So there's one other thing. There's one other thing here at the end of this bit where he talks about what doesn't work for the dual system is that the the three aggregate equalities. Sorry, let's read it exactly what he says. On both the traditional dual system interpretation and the new interpretation, NI, cost prices and capital advances differ across the value and price systems. This is what we discussed earlier about how they get out of whack. There are consequently two distinct and unequal general rates of profit as well, and the remaining aggregate equalities cannot both hold true, contrary to what Marx concluded. Dualists justify these discrepancies by arguing that his conclusions are incorrect, the consequences of his alleged error. Okay, so this idea of, the rates of profit is equal to the rate of surplus, the general rates of profit and the general rates of surplus at the surplus profit and price profit don't hold in this interpretation. So that's a kind of a, that if they're right, there's a big problem with Marx and his inequalities are a load of bullshit. That's essentially what they're saying here. Anybody have any problems with that?
No. Have we gone into what makes the new interpretation different than the traditional dual system interpretation?
Okay, let's do it here. This little here. The NI holds that workers' actual money wages are the variable capital of both price system and value system. Okay, so instead of having one just in value and one in price in the two difference, they basically use it as price, and they probably have some melt to transmute them between the two. That makes sense. So that's just a slight variation, but we don't need to really worry about the slight variations of these things, because we'll find out that they all later on there's a lot of different variations, but they'll all have the same root, say, core problem.
Well,
later on.
I think this is interesting because of what it points to, though, is that even this new interpretation is an attempt basically to be like, Well, how can we maintain like a dual systems framework, you know, but like just stapling together one important factor as having a single system kind of.
Yeah, it seems
Like
quite arbitrary to me.
It definitely seems like an ad hoc thing that points towards the single system thing.
Okay, so let's get on. Let's see if we can get onto this single system. So we kind of broached this earlier. Pouya said, discussed a little bit further. This is the idea that we have just a single, instead of two separate ones going out of whack from each other. We've got now single interpretations. So the TSSI is one of these, and so it's a single system. So you can switch between labor values and you can switch between price values, but they both concur, and it's the same system. There's not two separate rates of profit or any of this stuff going on. So this is so Kleiman goes in here and saying in the 80s, you know, these single systems starts coming out. One of them is the temporal that Kleiman and Freeman and these guys and Carcetti and others have put forward. And then these others is the simultaneous single system. So these are people who still value inputs and outputs simultaneously and try and mash a bit of neoclassical economics into Marx. So does anybody want to talk on the single system stuff here? Is there anything we need to go through?
Yeah, maybe we could just talk about what it is, maybe go over what we said.
Okay. Let's just read it. I'll read this bit here. Okay, so first, prices of production and average profit depend upon the general value rate profit, S over C. So there's no distinct price system. Second, prices influence value magnitudes. So there's no distinct value system either. The constant capital, value advanced, and the value transfer depend upon the prices, not the values of means of production. Okay, that's what we were talking about earlier. Moreover, the single system interpretations concur with the new interpretation's conclusion regarding the variable capital advanced. It depends upon the workers' actual wages, the price, and not the values of things they consume. Okay, so that's just kind of, I think that's kind of going over what we said earlier.
Yeah, it's sort of like, what if we just applied the new interpretation to all capital?
Yeah, pretty much.
Instead of just putting it on labor power for that, and Kleiman makes a point that it's for different reasoning, and the reasoning that he gives in the previous section for the new interpretations exceptions, it definitely seems, yeah, again, like a little like a Just So story. Like, well, you know, because there's bargaining power or something. And you know what? And again, this is what Kleiman wrote. I'm not sure how charitable he's being, but honestly, after like surveying some of the things that he does talk about, you know, like I'm inclined to believe that he believes that he can make his case while being like pretty charitable to the authors that he's covering.
Okay. One then thing about the single system, all three aggregate equalities hold. Nonetheless, some dualists have argued that single system interpretations contradicts Marx's theory and that a product's value is determined by the amount of labor needed to produce it. Okay. Dual system interpreter. Okay, so let me see.
And yeah, he accepts that critique.
So where do you think you accept that critique then? Let's go to that.
Single just in the paragraph under it, in the first sentence.
Yeah.
Single system interpretations do contradict this reading of the theory, but an alternative reading is possible. And this is where I think we talked about it earlier, when I was talking about it. So it's not the amount of labor needed to
by the means of production, it's the price.
Yeah. It's a price needed to acquire them.
Yeah.
Or the amount of labor needed to acquire them, in which is their price divided by the amount. Like,
as far as I can remember, there is like, you know, there's some kind of interpretive controversy from the textual evidence of what Marx has said. He says we're going to get there in chapter 6. So let's kind of leave that for now. and we'll have a look at it later on. But
One thing I wish that Andrew would have done is provide some examples of a dual system interpretation, such as a reproduction scheme or.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and then I'm thinking like the third chapter goes into I guess the whole book is sort of like.
Yeah, maybe he talks about it later, but he gives some examples of simultaneism in the third chapter. But
That's true. Actually, he doesn't. I don't recall him going too deeply into this. Although he thinks, you know what he thinks is that this follows, like the dual system stuff follows from the simultaneous, like math, right? And that, like I believe that's the claim. Like he basically thinks there's a cardinal error, and that all other errors sort of result.
Yeah, and if you throw out the, the simultaneous problem, the other stuff is kind of secondary. But I actually asked him that question myself. I said, why you spend a lot of time talking about like the temporal nature stuff, and I said, like, why does it need to be a single system? Why don't you have dual tables so that we can see all these problems?
Yeah, or maybe just give some
And
examples of how it works.
Yeah, look, I asked him that explicitly, and he said, "Oh, I left that for a reader's, exercise." I was like, an exercise, but
that just raises giant question mark. Just like when he in the last chapter when he divides by the cost, I was so confused by that. And when he gives us simultaneous, the example of the simultaneous with the equation in the next chapter, there's one it's only one system. It's only price. But I mean, this has nothing to do with a dual. I mean, so it has, like he doesn't give any examples of a dual system. Like he gives an example of simultaneism, but I wish there was more about the dual system, so I could like really understand it.
Okay, well, let's keep going. Okay, so we got here now to chapter 2.2.3. Oh, we're really doing good here today. How long are we on?
Let's see, about an hour.
About an hour. We're about an hour in, and we're on to the third.
20 minutes of it was Grossman.
Oh yeah, it surely was Grossman. Now,
zing.
Zing.
Hey, look, I got all day.
Where's the drum roll button? Where is the drum roll button?
Timpani.
So simultaneous valuation versus temporal valuation. Rosa, you're being very quiet here. Is she still on?
Yeah, I'm still on. I'm just, I read this like 2 weeks ago or something dumb like that. So I probably should have like skimmed it over a bit more than I did. But yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff, let me tell you.
Okay, I'm going to mute you. All right, Emmanuel, you're back on track here. Come on.
What am I? All right. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Do it.
The simultaneous versus temporal valuation stuff.
That's the one. Yeah. Do you want to give us an overview here?
Right. So basically, the other big controversy, apart from the prices and value stuff, where Kleiman says that Mr. Moneybags is going to buy everything with money anyway. The other main thing is what happens at the end of the production cycle different from the beginning of the production cycle. So he's going to say that everyone recognizes that input prices and output prices can differ, but the core thing, and this is why I was going on about the importance of how much value is transferred by the means of production, and that part of the interpretation is super important. The issue here is that he puts it a lot better than I do. He says some simultaneous interpretations deny that actual input prices are relevant for the determination of the capital advanced, the value transferred, and variable capital. The relevant input prices they maintain are those that equal the output prices. Most simultaneous, however, acknowledge that actual input prices are determinants of the capital advanced, etc. So it's basically like you have to look throughout a production period and ask yourself, what was the current cost of acquiring the means of production? What's the new value added at time 1, and then at time 2, basically all of that can change, right? So and the problem is that if you value everything simultaneously, Kleiman is going to prove to you that you've just that basically boils down to physicalism. That's not right here, but that's sort of what Kleiman holds. I'm sorry if I was a bit more confusing on that than I should have been, but
you know, I think. Yeah, who's there? Derek. Derek is coming in to throw bombs. How's it going? Derek from Symptomatic Regnus, everybody. He's not even wearing glasses.
Yeah, I'm super late today because I literally just got off another one of these calls talking about Capital Volume 1, and this came up today. That's what I was going to talk about. Because I was talking about how social necessity implies a temporal element that means you cannot simultaneously value things in the MCM circuit, and so if you have a simultaneous reading,
explain that. That's a hell of a sentence. So put that in English.
I'm speaking Marxian, but okay. It means that if you think that value inputs and outputs happen simultaneously, you're denying that there's any social element to the whole system, because sociality happens in time. So, I mean, I think Kleiman's mathematics on this works. He doesn't use its argument, but I also think, like, the more I was reading chapter 3 of Capital, the more I was like, why did anyone ever think this? Because it denies socially necessary labor time as part of the way money works.
Yes, because productivity happens over time. That's the entire point of productivity. And Marxist theory is a theory wherein productivity matters. So, like...
Yeah, it's just that they think that they can adequately model. I don't think that they're trying to deny sociality. I think that they can adequately model that stuff with like an abstraction from time like that, which I just don't get it.
Yeah, the impression that I get is like specifically the theories that are going against TSSI are basically like trying to like get like value from like price of production. That's what I generally get out of it. Like they just sort of like conflate like labor with like price of production. Is that horribly wrong? Is that?
I don't think they do that. You know, I think what they do by actually setting the inputs equal to outputs is that they end up essentially denying the possibility that value can ever raise in the system, because the value at the end will always be the same as the value at the start.
Which makes no sense.
Which makes no. Yeah, I don't know if I had that right, but that's how I've understood it.
I agree with you. I've never thought about it. It doesn't make any sense.
And so,
as an aside, Rosa, I do think that is what the kind of Ricardian like econophysics thing is doing, is making Marxist labor values like prices of production.
Yes, that's the econophysicists are doing. Like he gets into it when we get onto the Anwar Sheikh stuff, where they basically Kleiman calls it labor theory of price, where they're trying to basically make it just the price of the object is the amount of labor that's in it. But like Marx is not saying that, and like that his whole idea of solving the transformation problem you know, the wine and the bread, why they have different prices even though they get the same labor, is implicit in all of volume 3 and all of these things. You know, he's talking about how profit equalizes across these things. You know, so I think there's some of that wrapped up in there definitely towards the end, but specifically in the simultaneous specifically in these dual and the simultaneous stuff, I think it's more that shoehorning of neoclassical inputs and outputs being the same, having the same
Right, but
value.
Kleinman argues that one naturally leads to the other in terms of like the implications. So like that's sort of like this sort of like dual interpretation automatically sort of leads to like an unintentionally Ricardian like theory of value.
I don't think he says that. I think it leads to a physicalist.
Yeah, he's going to say that on the next page. Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is also just my final thing, and then I promise I'll shut up. But I like, there's a reason I keep referring to this, you know, current cost of acquiring the means of production, because he's cutting the simultaneous some slack in that. You know, if the value transferred from the means of production depends on the current cost, right, then you have some sort of simultaneism going on. And Kleiman then goes on to say, like, no, this is why we claim that it's not the replacement cost, right? So if the value transferred by the means of production would be related to the replacement cost of the means of production, then yes, you know, simultaneism follows from that. Let me see where he says that. It's on page 35. So this is sort of where really understanding how the current cost, the current cost for the value needed to acquire the means of production, why that's different from just the replacement cost. So if you buy a leather making machine or whatever in 2017, how do you know how much value is transferred? And the simultaneous are going to say that, you know, you just look at what it would cost to replace it, right? You just look at, you go to the market and you see that now this thingamajig sells for $200 less. Well, then $200 less in total would be transferred to the product. And this is why the TSSI really, and why Kleiman really at the very beginning states that, you know, current cost and replacement cost are not the same thing, because if they were, the simultaneous would be right by inference, but they're not. So that's why the sort of current cost thing and why it's different is key to all this.
Anybody want to say anything about that?
So the only thing I would want to add to that is another way out of the problem, if you're kind of holding quasi-simultaneous leadings, is value form woo.
Let's not go there yet.
Yeah,
I know it's not.
That's the next section. Or the,
I know it's not the next section.
I knew it. Starting to be on in 1 second, and you start talking value.
No,
not there yet.
No, I want to recall something that Rosa said, and just defend like that. That Kleiman does sort of think that all of the, and actually it kind of links into what you just said, Derek, is that basically all the sins of insane like value degenerating research program can be like linked to the logical problems that this stuff causes. Like,
yeah, absolutely. To me, and like we find again throughout the book, we find again and again each problem. It just comes up chapter after chapter. Simultaneous implies this, temporal implies that. And it's just again and again and again and again. And it's the same thing. It's the root of all of these problems.
I think that the best way to explain the simultaneous evaluation is actually the example in the start of chapter 3. So maybe, we can go on to the value form and then maybe continue this conversation when we get there.
Okay, let me just have a quick check here of. So we don't want to go into chapter 2.2.4 really, or we have done it already. People think.
Let's see.
So we've kind of talked about simultaneous and physicalism, how they both are implied to each other.
Have we really like talked about Sraffa and Steedman? Because that's like the
okay.
like,
yeah. Okay. Well, like Sraffa, it was a guy in. He was like a kind of he was a friend of Keynes in Cambridge, and he was kind of consider himself some kind of like, I don't know, Marxian guy who thought the value theory was wrong because of this simultaneous problem, and came up with, his own ideas, which are called Sraffianism, which have been kind of like basically what to me most of these things are some kind of Sraffianism. It's why I think Kleiman on his blog says that he doesn't want to work on Sraffa's farm no more, which always makes me laugh.
just a interesting Marxist historical note. Sraffa had a complex friendship with Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, and played an important role in getting the prison notebooks out of Mussolini's jails.
That's interesting.
Into the
Never
world.
knew that.
Yeah. So Sraffa has like a little left-wing cred in that way.
He does, but like from what I understand is that it was at the behest of Keynes that he kind of set him on an attack against Marxian economics. Now, I might have that totally wrong, but I think I have read that before, that he was like Keynes used him as an attack dog against Marxist economics.
Well, that's what Kleiman, or that's what Andrew. I'm just gonna call him Andrew because he's alive. That's what Andrew claims that. Oh God, I forgot. It's later on. He claims that Samuelson does this.
Samuelson, yeah, but this was Sraffa's stuff was before Samuelson, I think.
Right. But Samuelson's like, oh man, Sraffa, you Marxists, you should really look at Sraffa.
Yeah, because Sraffa kicked his ass. Sraffa kicked Samuelson's ass in what were called the capital debates. I think they're called the capital debates in neoclassical theory, where Samuelson had to basically, after quite a while, a few years of arguing his case, had to basically hands up and go, Sraffa is correct. So he had a lot of respect for Sraffa.
Wow.
So yeah, the capital, I think they're called the Cambridge capital debates.
All right.
So Cambridge versus the other Cambridge, and the British Sraffa and the British Cambridge defeated like Samuelson and all the top Whigs, and they had to admit defeat.
Okay, so we're not just here to shit on Piero Sraffa. He sounds like a pretty impressive human being, but like it's we think he might not be righter than Marx. Might be the wrong way to read Marx.
Yeah, I want to go about how we say everything is wrong, it seems to Sraffa, when a lot of the simultaneous theories go back a little earlier than that. It's just that Sraffa's the strongest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like seen, the school is called after him, essentially, it's Sraffianism. It is a large school of Keynesian, post-Keynesian economic school. A lot of like people like Steve Keenan that would be kind of Sraffians, I think.
It definitely piques my interest because it's the Sraffians especially that is who the analytical Marxists appeal to be like, yeah, we don't really have to do like Marxist stuff. Like this has already been settled. Like makes me want to read Steedman.
Okay, so I think we're going to get to what sometimes we kind of discussed around this. Does anybody want to say anything about this now?
Wait, one more thing about Sraffa is that these econophysics people also hold him pretty highly. But I've never read him. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Okay. So
they do.
If we describe physicalism, that surplus
Okay,
like
physicalism is the idea that the profit rate is based on the physical outputs. So if you have 10 physical inputs and you got 15 physical outputs, then your profit rate will be 50%. Okay, so this is gets away from any idea of a value rate. Okay.
Well, yeah, but values and surplus values and prices of production, average profit, like all this stuff,
all that stuff goes out the window.
The sole proximate determinants of these things are technology and workers' real wages. That's it.
Yeah. And
so it's a radical reduction of the theory to something that's a completely different theory.
Yeah, it's a reduction to, all of them are a reduction to a theory that says the opposite. One, it says that, price, productivity increases the rate of profit. That's the opposite of what Marx said. And that, the value, the labor time is the determinant of the rate of profit, not the physical output.
If you think about it, like if you really want to reduce everything to material factors, right? Like, and maybe in the kind of like overly reductionist way that I think some of the eliminative materialists, like neurosciences, no offense, Pouya, but like,
it doesn't have to be though.
Like, but I think you understand where I'm coming from here. Is that this would be the most materialist of material. I mean, value's so ghostly, right? Like,
Well, Well, I don't think neuroscience is necessarily eliminative materialism, but
no, I don't think so either. I'm talking about that philosophical kind of bent to interpretations of neuroscience.
Okay, let's keep going.
One thing.
Let's not bring up Ray Brazier in this conversation. I don't want to go there.
This simultaneism, I think, just goes completely against the labor theory of value. I mean, it just has nothing to do with labor theory.
Someone
just kills it dead in the water. The minute you use simultaneism, it kills it.
Alex in the chat says that Wittgenstein and Sraffa were BFFs.
I have a huge respect for both of them, but I don't know if that's right. Although I think both of them are wrong. But
Wittgenstein got converted to socialism by Sraffa apparently, but not the right kind of socialism. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Sraffa, to me, he just strikes me as a social democrat, and that's what I expect he is.
So, I'll just say one thing on this entire thing, and then I promise I'll shut up again.
Is this one thing on the second thing on the third thing?
Second thing on the third thing, comma the. But like the core claim is simultaneism leads to physicalism, and physicalism reduces away all of the labor theory of value. Why is that important? Well, it's important because in physicalism, productivity does not matter in any other way than that increases in productivity produce more things, and if more things are produced, then the rate of profit will rise. So there is nothing in physicalism, like once you do away with specifically Marx's theory of value, you can't explain automation, right? So if according to Marx, if everything was 100% super automated, then there is, everything could essentially be free, right? He's saying that value is inversely proportional to productivity. The more productivity you have, the lower the value of the commodity. Whereas in all physicalist theories, productivity is all that matters. So increases in productivity is increases in outputs. Increases in outputs are increases in value. And I just don't know how anyone can take such a theory seriously.
Mason apparently does. I mean,
who?
Because this is like the ultimate vulgar developmentalism, though. I'm a developmentalist kind of myself, but like we can just make more stuff, and eventually everything will be free. Like that's the logic here.
Well, that's not the logic of Sraffa.
No, but that is the ultimate conclusion of physicalism. Like, because if productivity is just a net gain, then just get more productive all the time.
Yeah, but like the rate of profit, they're talking about the rate of profit is basically a physical rate of profit. So like if we look at the actual rate of profit in economies, that graph that we have from the Esteban Maito paper just is a counterfactual of great importance.
And also,
I'm slightly skeptical of that graph, though.
Yeah,
but, I think we should move on.
But like the right, okay. Every business person knows this, right? You invest in new technology in order to undercut your competition and make shit cheaper. Like no one has ever invested in more technology. Like, oh, then we can make shit more expensive. So like it's the core tenet of Sraffianism and of all simultaneous evaluation, and thus all of physicalism, is that if that were true, then no behavior in any capitalist society makes any sort of sense.
Okay, let's keep going. I know what you mean by saying you're skeptical because I don't know the ins and outs of all of the calculations, but Michael Roberts is a guy who is a guy who's fairly reputable, and he kind of uses Maito's work quite a lot.
Yeah, I've seen data from Zachariah and also data from Roberts himself that Roberts has a series of United States that goes back to 1800s, and you see waves, and also in Zachariah you see periods. I've seen a paper in Zachariah he was talking about equalization of profit rates, and
yes, I read that one. Yeah,
he had rates of profit from many countries, and they were waving, but at a certain level of I'm curious about what the laws of boom are, or we can determine the falling rate of profit and the absolute barrier to accumulation due to insufficient valorization perfectly, but whether or not we can determine the period of crisis perfectly is what seems like a decisive question to me.
Well, I don't think it's decisive at all. I think it's intractable. But anyway, what else is intractable is the value form.
Wait, we have to get ready, Tom.
Okay, do we have any sound effects? There we go.
All right, I'm ready.
Oh, there's the bong rip. Okay, value form. Does anybody
God dang hippies.
Welcome to the Noy Marx lecture.
Yeah. Value form is just fascinating to me because I went down this rabbit hole for years trying to figure out exactly what it was arguing, because it felt like there was a metaphysical bait and switch somewhere, because I just couldn't figure out what value actually meant by value form theory. And this one paragraph that I didn't even notice when I first read this book like 5 years ago totally was like, oh, because there is a metaphysical bait and switch in value form theory. But it would solve a lot of these temporal simultaneous problems by making it so abstract it's not, you can't prove it one way or the other.
So, I think, let me just, if I can put this in plain English, what I think the value form, there's not one kind of set of people who are saying, I think there's a lot of noise in people who are clumped together as value form. But the general idea is that value is determined at the point of exchange as opposed to the point of production.
That's like the most reasonable thing that they're saying. What I also think that they're saying is that you can't really do value math because the transformation is so profound between the spheres. And I don't even think they're actually dual systems theorists. I think they conceive of themselves in a dual system-y, in a single system-y way.
Yeah,
just that. Yes.
I was gonna make a really stupid joke about like you need a high enough IQ, like just a IQ that is beyond just 200 to do the math for value. Like just it's impossible for the human mind to comprehend math for value. Only Pol Pot, the brave genius Pol Pot, was actually able to abolish the value form.
Oh my god.
Oh god.
Remember that guy in remember that guy in Star Trek Next Generation, the guy with the strange large head who was communicating with what you call the doctor's son?
Wesley Crusher.
Yeah, do you remember that guy? And they would travel space and time, yeah.
Oh, the Traveler.
The Traveler guy, yeah. You need him. You need him to understand value form.
Yeah.
But like if we think about it, like I read a paper that Simon did discussing the value form, and he made the point like that if price is determined at the point of exchange, well, that means that you can't ever really get a bargain. Yeah, you can't buy something way below its value.
Also, it removes exploitation as a possibility. Actually,
well, I don't know if it does that. You could still be exploited, but
like if that were true, every people in finance would have to go to jail, right? Okay, not that I'm not in favor of that. Like if you own a bunch of stock and the stock goes up in value, all that's going to happen is that you have your assets are valued higher, but like and when you sell your stock at the new value, right, all that's happening is that you do a switch from your balance sheet to your statement of operations. Like all that's happening in any business transaction is that equal amounts of value are transferred. This is like every fucking stockbroker does all of their bookkeeping and everything according to this core assumption. Like if you can't do it any other way. It's impossible that your assets stay the same. Like your stock doesn't go up, but then you sell it, and oh shit, when you sold it, that's when the higher value is realized. No, you look at the fucking market, you see that your stock has gone up. That means that you now own assets worth more than you did before. And every textbook in finance is going to say that your losses are only realized whenever you fucking actually trade. Oh my god, this rises me the fuck up. I gotta drink.
Well, I mean, it also just leads to weird temporalness. Like I really can't understand that. I think that's what, like, on the abstract, on the very practical level, Emmanuel, that's what it leads to. On the abstract level, it leads to like this weird thing where no matter what you do, since the value in labor can only be understood at exchange, meaning it's given value backwards. Like that's what that implies, right? Like it's a posteriori. It retroactively valid. Just the time mechanism doesn't make any sense. And
okay.
When
the traveler's level of IQ is because it says that value is determined only in the future, man. It's the future talking back to us. That's what it leads to, which is insane.
I think in Marxian theory, stocks have no value. They're fictitious capital, so their price just varies with the rate of interest and the dividend.
Yes, but you still trade equal amounts of like your profit is exactly equal to whatever you sell it for. The valuation, quote unquote, the price increase happens before you sell it, right? That's the key insight here. So like whether even in Marx, so if you own fictitious capital, fictitious capital can still derive a profit from it, but that profit doesn't really it doesn't come from exchange. The rise in the prices of the assets that you sell occur before any transaction has ever happened, right?
I think
I want to push back a little bit on this, because when I was first reading Marx, I think that
this is how I kind of took it, because I understand value to really be an emergent property of the market. And it seems like it always seemed equally metaphysically
value of it's an emergent
property
property
of a market dominated society, like of capitalism.
production,
right?
Of production.
Yeah. Right. So no, that's fair. But anyway,
all societies value society. I mean, have value in the way we mean it in capital, and that's not true. If it's just in production, it has to be the production and market relationship.
Right. Like you're right. There has to be a market. It's definitely market emergent. All right. That's all I was trying to say there. And that there seems to be something equally metaphysical about the idea of something being made, having the value, and then it doesn't get sold, and so there's never a realization of value, but it's the value is just sitting there, embodied, crystallized.
Yeah, but that's a weird simultaneous reading in a way. I actually was literally dealing with this question today in chapter 3 of Capital, because I was like, once something is grown for the market, we can value it whether it's sold or not. Like, otherwise, you can't value the value of a farm.
Right. But
it's the fact that it could be sold and is made for something other than use value that, I mean, I get that does kind of sound a little bit like this, but it's not the same thing as that value exists the moment that you put it in exchange, because then the money, I mean, then there's all kinds of other functions that would be nullified, and they don't make sense anymore when you do it that way.
Okay. Can I read this sentence here? And I want to give a thought experiment, one that I said to Lexi when we were chatting before, a few weeks before we decided to do this. Mohan's statement, for instance, indicates that whether the concrete labor used to produce a commodity counts as abstract labor is determined a posteriori. It all depends upon whether or not the commodity is subsequently sold. Okay, so let's imagine we're in a thought experiment. It's like it's in the Das Kapital world where supply and value are equally matched. Okay, and we've made a whole load of light bulbs, and the last 20 light bulbs are sitting on the shelf of this shop. All of the ones in the country have been sold, and our supply and demand is perfectly equal. So we got people waiting there, 20 people waiting in line each to buy their light bulb. Okay, and a bull runs into the shop and mashes and destroys all the light bulbs. Okay, are we saying, like, according to value form, those would not have any value when they're sitting there on the shelf waiting to be sold? Okay, do we think that's a reasonable thing?
That's okay.
That's it. That's it right there. Like, do they have value on the shelf? Where they had a value and then the bull came in and destroyed them, or they had no value to them?
Basically what it's saying is that commodities don't exist, right? Because a commodity is produced with the purpose of being exchanged. Look, there's plenty of exchange going on, even right now in capitalism, and lots of production that's going on, which are not commodities. Like I make dinner for me and my fiance every dinner. Like I don't
every dinner.
Yes, every day. But like,
hell yeah,
I don't. It's not the case that every time I do that, like I tell her, now you owe me the market value of yada yada. Like it's precisely it's outside. I don't do that for exchange. I do it for the use value of us having a good time. So it's outside of market relations. However, if I owned a restaurant, then that's an entirely different thing. That's the core of Marx's argument. Like, whether or not you produce it for the purpose of exchange is the key thing to whether or not it's a commodity. And if it's not a commodity, Marx's theory doesn't apply. So this thing that's, it's only valorized or it's determined, whether or not it's abstract labor is determined a posteriori. No, like that's just not how things happen. It's not whenever, my fiance digs into the chicken, and I say, oh, by the way, you don't have to pay for this. Like, that's not when when it becomes or doesn't become a commodity. It's whether or not I take a big loan from the bank of $100,000 and I put it into production and I open a restaurant and I hire workers specifically in order to make more money, that it becomes a commodity. Like, it's
No, right.
I can get what this gets a little complicated though, because I brought this same example up 3 weeks ago, trying to explain a similar point in chapter 2 of Capital Volume 1, where I was talking about like your garden being valuable the moment you intend to sell it. And it does make it seem like there's some kind of social intention that makes people who want this all to be very clean uncomfortable. Because if I'm growing stuff for my personal use, and then the moment I intend to sell it, I can evaluate it, whether I sell it, whether I sell it or not, does seem a little bit like, well, isn't that kind of subjective? Well, it's socially relative, actually, more than subjective. But I get why people would want to avoid that. But the way they're avoiding it creates more problems than it fixes. And I think it's just not that hard to say, well, I can value it based on my social relativity of bringing this to market. Because you can make something a commodity without like even going through the formal business process the moment you intend to sell it, even if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that a lot of people like this brings out a lot of like hot blood in Marxist theorists, but there's something about this whole debate that seems like flawed in its very terms. Like I'm so confused by like the value form people, because they think so much follows from the insight that values are only intelligible, in a sense, in exchange. But so someone in the chat said something that I so rarely see value form people actually saying, is that God. Okay, so they're not saying that you can't do the math. They're saying that you need to do the math in a very particular sort of way that respects the denotations of the quantities you're working with. So person in the chat with unpronounceable name, like, if that's what value formers were consistently arguing, I would be on their side. But very frequently, they do a mystifying thing and more or less kind of say that this is so complicated that, you couldn't really do this, that the residue of the use value that's being poorly translated into exchange value makes this all impossible.
Isn't that like an implicit just admitting that like the calculation problem is like correct, like specifically like in terms of like not being possible to calculate labor value, for like figuring all that out.
I would say so.
Planning.
So there's something in the chat that I want to address directly. Is that okay with all y'all?
Sure. I have another point, but I can go to it afterwards.
All right. So,
yes,
okay.
But
so,
Emmanuel, before we do that, I just want to read out the name of the person in the chat who said that, because I think we have to give somebody with a name like that a shout out.
Yeah. I was just gonna, I was just gonna do that.
Okay, you do it.
The user Oh Man Damp asks.
Not that one. That's not the one.
Okay. All right. Well,
it's LDSK JFHSL KJDH FLK JDHF. That's who was the value formers. Sorry, I just thought we should.
Okay. So we're not talking about the same. So that's the user that Lexi referred to. Yes. The thing I want to address is from Oh Man Damp, who asks, what about the drug dealer who gets high on his own supply? What about some schizoid salesman who constantly flips his mind as to if he will sell or not? And then, honestly, what's the point of the significance of this debate? Nothing hinges on it. It seems like intellectual masturbation. Now, while it is intellectual masturbation, I think it's really important, and it's important for this reason, right? So a drug dealer who gets high on his own supply owns a a set of value of his own supply, right? So if you have $10,000 worth of cocaine in your backpack or something, I don't know much about the street price of drugs these days, but like just go with it, right? Okay, you get high on 5% of that. All right, now you have less cocaine to sell. So the value of whatever's in your backpack has decreased by the amount that you consumed for yourself. Why is this important? Well, it's because it's important precisely because in Marx's value theory, equality of values are exchanged, right? So if an iPhone equals $1,000, it means that $1,000 and an iPhone have the same amount of value, right? So they're worth the same amount. And if this is true, then the value has to be determined before the exchange happens. It's not the exchange that creates the value. The iPhone is produced in order to obtain the $1,000. So essentially what happens if you think that value is determined in exchange is that you then lack a description or an account of why it is that people want to produce for exchange rather than just for their own consumption, right? So in other words, they lack any sort of distinctive feature of a commodity. And if that's what happens, and you don't have a theory of what a commodity is and why commodities are produced, then you're essentially, it essentially boils down to physicalism. You're saying there's nothing really important about producing for exchange. All that matters is the mass of, cocaine or weed that's produced and how much is consumed. So that would be my response to that.
I don't think that value formers think that way. Like I think that
don't think that way, but I would say it's because they're not being consistent. I mean, yeah. I was about to bring this up because this is my other issue. So much is made about the importance of this so we can get the categories right and calculations or whatever. But when you look at the people who actually do this, the conclusions they draw from it are not only just a little bit different, they're diametrically friggin' opposed. Like, so communization theory is often heavily dependent on value form, but then so is a lot of like Dalinka social democracy. Now, how on earth could the same theory lead to those completely different readings of both how the economy would actually work and what you should do about it? One being basically let it collapse, and the other being like quasi-Keynesian interventionism. If the same theory leads to those dramatically opposed policy conclusions and predictions, it means that the theory is unclear.
Yeah, I might have said this before, but I feel like the hidden head of value form is, you have Marx, and you have I. Rubin, and then you have like Derrida, because they're kind of reading. This Neue Marx lecture stuff was done at a time basically where Marx was identified with global Marxism. Global Marxism was identified with Stalinism and imperialist social democracy. And there was a new generation of people that kind of implicitly agreed that Marx had failed and and that we need like a new reading of him, for a new liberatory politics. And it kind of doesn't matter if we're following Marx's positions.
I think Andrew says in the book there that they explicitly say they're not following what Marx has said. Also, can I just read out a bit here that from a paper that Andrew wrote about the value form, and it's just what Marx actually said about this topic.
Nice.
I'll read it here. Yeah. In results of the immediate process of production, he considered the case of capitalist farmers who produce seed, some of which they then employ as input into their own production rather than selling it on the market. He argued that it is material, i.e. it is unimportant whether, as in the case of seed in farming, a portion of the product is at once employed by the producer as means of labor, or whether it is first sold and then converted back into a means of labor. Where means of labor such as seed are not changed into actual money, they are converted into accounting money, and the element of value they add to the product is precisely calculated. So this is the idea. If a farmer is doing his books about what he's produced, and if some of his inputs are stuff that he's produced himself, he values them at the price they would get in the market. He doesn't, like, their true value. They never go into the market. They're never their value is never realized in the market as the value form, people would say. But he'll actually, bookkeeping wise, will put in what the value of the actual input is. I'll go on here. Capitalist agriculture calculates its costs, treats each item as a commodity, regardless of whether it buys it from one or another, from another, or from itself, i.e., from production. Products produced by the farmer that he himself or she then employs as inputs become commodities they have bought or that can be bought. They have long since become commodities in his eyes, since they are articles, means of labor, that are at the same time values forming part of his capital. Right, so that's really important.
Yes.
Right? Like that they're a part of his capital, whether he sells them or not.
Yeah, it's basically saying balance sheets are a thing, and assets are assets, and assets have values regardless of whether you sell them or not.
Yeah.
You've got your assets. You've got your bag of cocaine that you may or may not snort or yourself or whatever. If you're a drug dealer or if you're a farmer, it's still the case that you own this and this amount of value, which has the form of seed or zucchini or weed. It's assets exist is basically what this is saying. And like I don't understand. I really don't understand the controversy of this, because it's just the way capitalist economies work, right? You value your assets.
One thing
about the
who's that? Oh, yeah.
Pouya. About the cocaine example and if they use it or not is you don't need, like, if you purchase a commodity and use it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its value wasn't produced during production. Like, for example, you may buy cotton and use that to clean your ears or something, and you can also sell cotton as a commercial capitalist, and that doesn't mean that the value form is correct. And
it's only things that are produced explicitly not to be used on a market that would not have this sort of value, and even then they have use value. I mean, it's just, I get what Lexi's getting at, that these terms can kind of create a kind of metaphysical problem that actually isn't there. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, those terms clarify more than the problems they create, and I think a lot of this is just like it's describing stuff at such a level of abstraction that you're removing it from any possibility of corresponding to anything.
Yeah.
Here's a quote from Andrew, which I think is a really good one. Marx holds that abstract labor, not concrete labor, is what creates value. If we try to combine these two ideas, the result is that value is created if and when the commodity is sold. There is no meaningful sense in which labor can be said to be determining value here. Instead, labor time and value are being determined whether commodity sells or not. And there's another one. Wait. That was let me see.
That in the book?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it is.
Give me a page there and I'll put it up on the screen.
Labor 37. Labor must be abstract already in the production process if it is to create the product's value as well as the product itself. It follows that the product's value is created in production and comes into being the moment in which is created and comes to being the moment in which a product is produced, rather than being established subsequently. So I mean, if you're supposed to say that labor creates value, it has to create it in the production process. It cannot create it after the production process. This is not a scientific theory.
Oh,
Yeah, that's it.
I actually found in Kleinman's paper on this that's called Capitalism's Historical Specificity and Price Determination. That's his like value form paper. There's a footnote that actually directly answers the interpretation that I first had when I was reading all this, which is why I kind of just, was like, why is this a problem? So here, yeah, you probably don't have it up, but it's if anyone's, it's called Capitalism's Historical Specificity and Price Determination. It's his value form paper. Basically, it's his paper responding to value form. Let's see. On page, it's page 4 of the PDF. It's page 4 of the PDF, yeah. And it's footnote 4. And so I'm gonna read the sentence that footnote 4 is denoting, and then I'm going to read footnote 4. Okay, so workers' labor takes the form of abstract labor expressed in money. When the products they have produced are sold, so value is established in the market, hence a market concept, rather than having existence prior to it. So footnote 4. A more nuanced version of this is the argument that because capitalist production is production for exchange, an ideal precommensuration of commodities to money takes place before exchange, giving commodities an ideal or anticipated but not actual value ahead of time. So that's Reuten. Arthur endorses this position, and Murray upholds a similar position, which he attributes to Marx, that value is latent in the sphere of production. It can be actualized only by being sold. A comment on the term actualization is apropos. As we shall see below, Marx did speak of realization of commodities prices in circulation, but he used Realisierung. Realisierung.
Not Verwirklichung.
Yeah. So not actualization. And so this is realization in German, right? For the ordinary accounting sense. A capital gain, for example, accrues to the owner of an asset when its price rises, while this already existing capital gain is realized in this sense when the asset is sold at this higher price.
Yeah.
So he actually, addresses this, what I thought is the really interesting value form stuff that wasn't just shallow, and that I think isn't just trying to fuck with the text, and kind of thinks that there's it's kind of an Althusserian argument almost, that Marx is making this incomplete break with Ricardo, and that Marx's actual thought is Ricardian. It's not quite what Marx was getting at. We really, oh, he actually says this too. Marx's halfway break with the classical naturalistic labor embodied theory.
Yeah, again, all of this is saying that, assets are a thing, right? The value of your assets, yes, they're only realized. This is an accounting term. They're realized when they're sold, but the rise in value or anything is prior to that. All you've done is you've converted your assets into cash of equal value. That's what assets are. It's how they work. It's how everyone does accounting, pretty much. So there's this looks like it's sort of a value form, let's go back to the actual German thing, but it's actually saying no. What Marx is saying by realization is what accountants mean by realization, which is that the capital gain, the already existing capital gain, right? Your assets increase in value, and then you sell it, and all that you've done is transfer the value of your assets into cash. You still have equality of exchange.
Okay, one thing I was going to say, I read somewhere, and it might have been in that paper on that we're reading from, The Climate on Capitalism's Historical Specificity and Price Determination. Catchy title, that one. Was that, the value forum kind of came about as, historically came about after, this great problem with, in the 70s of, the inconsistency of Marx's stuff was thought to be, everybody thought that, Marx's economics doesn't work. And that if you were unable to do the math in a clear, precise way that would show a flaw, you could get away with still having this idea of Marx being correct. I think that's in that paper there somewhere. I think that's probably a fairly historically valid way to think about value form and why they came about. What do people think about that?
Rubens is too early for that.
Okay, that's the I.A. Rubens, the Russian dude.
Yeah, I mean, that's all. That's really my only suspicion, is that most value form theorists go back to Rubens, and Rubens is way early.
But like, do they, or is it that he became fashionable when this other problem became a problem? You know what I mean? Like, there's always a theorist that'll say some random shit somewhere, and then it'll get picked up when the need for
random shit in the sense of like a book that is as long as one of the volumes of Capital. But I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. I'm going to say something that is going to probably get me in trouble.
Somebody's phone is ringing. I don't know if I'm hearing phones ringing.
All right. It's that I think when we try to read motivations into why this stuff came out and say it's historical, that's not a sound argument, and that is something that is always done around these questions that I actually think has weakened the reception of this book, because those aren't provable. Like, to say that there's a perverse motivation for why people were going back to this is actually, it's an informal logical fallacy to even attempt it.
Well, it's not in the book, so let's not go on to that argument, because it's not there. It's something I just brought in.
It's not in the book. It's something it's made tangentially to it, and it actually soured me to a lot of this unnecessarily for years, because I was just like, we can't know that.
I'm gonna have to agree, because this book is solid.
Yeah, it's not in the book, so let's not my stupid comment. Let's get off, track and.
All right.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So
are you saying that other people said the same thing, or what? I'm interrupting something here, obviously.
Oh, I just said that many people have said that it was the 70s thing, and I suspect that is why Rubens came about. But Rubens saw this as a serious enough research program. And here's the other thing: I'm not sure that I will also say this: I'm not sure that all the current value form theorists read Rubens fairly, because that text is really hard. Like, so I'll just leave it at that. Like, I have read large chunks of Rubens and not exactly known if I actually got it.
That seems to be everybody's opinion on.
I wish Stalin didn't kill him.
I wish he killed him before he wrote the book.
Oh, fuck off.
Oh, snap.
I'm joking. Sorry, I'm getting tired now. We've been on for 2 hours and we're an hour late starting.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so we're I had a terrible night.
Oh my god, fuck value form theory. Like, Jesus.
We've done value form. Is there anybody? So we've done value one, chapter 1 and 2. We didn't get into chapter 3 as I expected, we wouldn't. But so next time we'll do chapter 3. Right? Do we have any finishing tied the whole thing up points that people want to make? Pouya had to leg it, so thanks for coming on, Pouya. Anybody want to just have a general, make some general statements on? We now have the TSSI, and we now have the alternatives. Is there anything that's sticking out to anybody right now before we quit?
Okay, I'm gonna say my my TLDR of the 2.2 and the like try to summarize it. Like in my view, this whole thing boils down to two ways of regarding Marx. One is that Marx was a really good economic and a really good economic theorist with a lot of clear thoughts who jumbled all of it up in very obscure jargon. And the sort of key thing is to dig behind all of the jargon and distill it into and reinstate all of the really clear ideas that he had, which is what Kleiman is trying to do. And then there is this other school of thought that thinks that all of the fluff, that's where it's really at. And this, rigorous economic theory is not really important or not really what Marx is about. And the latter is the value form school. It regards all the fluff and all the intellectual masturbation as the core of Marx rather than what he's actually trying to say. If you dig down to what Marx is really saying, you end up with a single system interpretation in a temporal way, which is what Kleiman is trying to do. And this is why this is a really good book on Marx's actual economics theory, because Marx was a great theoretician, but a terrible teacher. And that's my TLDR.
What does TLDR mean?
Too long, didn't read.
Yeah, should be too long, didn't listen. No, I'm not joking. That was really good. No, I agree with you. Like, because I see I was surprised when I read Capital, and when I was interviewing like some people earlier on, and when I was doing the podcast, before I'd read some of the stuff, and Kleiman or somebody would say, well, Marx was a scientist, and I'd be like, what? And the book is really good because it gets us back to this idea of Marx as a scientist, and that's what he is. He's trying to apply the scientific method to economics, and a lot of the stuff that I feel that I feel like I do feel like that the simultaneous and the dual systems and the single systems and the alternatives to TSSI, they're actually trying to be, I would think, kind of scientific. Now, I think they're wrong. Their idea of value and inputs and outputs is wrong, but they are being scientific, where I find the value form edge of it to be abstruse. Not that I've read much, but what I have read and read into and the arguments for and against, I just see as in like, it's like Alexi said, it's Derrida.
Yeah, maybe just to push back on myself a little bit, like, they're like the paradigm case here is Michael Henryk. Michael Henryk knows the texts of Marx front to back, is literally an archivist, a philologist, like really deep in the archive, like involved with the reconstruction of it's like the new Marx Engels collected works. It's the mega. It's like bigger than the Soviet collected works. So I trust this guy to know the texts, but I read through his introduction, and he was usually very clear about when he was departing from Marx. And the only time he kind of glossed over it is in this, like, what he calls this monetary reading, where you're reading it, from exchange. And the other thing is that the crisis theory that he ends up with, because he has this mathematical critique of Marx, which if you read it in his introduction seems, wow, this really goes through. If you don't have this TSSI reading underneath it to be like, well, that's because this equals that and like, he ends up with a real weak T crisis theory that some like post-Keynesians, have a stronger crisis theory. He ends up in a pretty much like the sort of sad Orwell, like, you know, would-be socialist place that I was born in. And I think it's important to historically situate that. And I take on Derek's, skepticism towards just trying to historicize it to, you know, not pay attention to what it's trying to say. But I think it's doing a different thing, and I'm approaching this from an analytical Marxist perspective. And the joke is that the analytical Marxists dismissed Marx's scientific theory here, the worst. Like they started with the assumption that, all right, this is bullshit. Like what can we really do with economics? Like, and you know, I think it's important for people to have this sort of point of view that want to reconstruct Marx's scientific contributions and try again at the world, you know, the immortal science here, like to really pay attention to the models that he had. So we can do all the complex math and fun modeling. Like, you know, we don't have to be just like stuck in the humanities department. We could compete with the libertarians and like the neoliberals and the fucking right-wing cranks and their economic think tanks. We could do a lot of cool science. We really could. But seems to be either I don't want to just say it's like good old like Leninist willpower that we need to just push through it, because there seems to be a lot of selection mechanisms and a lot of ways of throwing people off the scent. And with all due respect to the intentions, a lot of the value form theorists, like if people are getting lost in the weeds for like, you know, a few years, getting distracted from the math of Marx and, you know, the scientific, like being able to apply scientific contributions, there is something, you know, something of a purposeful stupidity to that.
Mic drop. Woo!
Yeah.
That was really good, Lexi.
My commentary is just that I'm finding this book way more illuminating now that I've dealt with these problems for 7 or 8 years than I did when I first read it, where where I only really had capital under my belt. I do want to, as a person who really thinks a lot about the intersection of science and Marxism, I do want to clarify what we mean by a lot of that. I think we get a little bit cavalier in ways that makes us easy to attack. Like when we talk about the scientific method in this is actually a logical methodology. And that's not science. Exactly. It's necessary to it. And I mean,
also want, for the norms of economic science, this kind of argumentation is very normal.
The norms of economic science are really low. Which is kind of Marx's point, right? I mean, that's why it's a critique of capital. But when we think about the only thing I want to say is I don't think the fluff is actually all that unrelated to the meat. Only when you start looking at that fluff in isolation. And it's maddening because it's not just like value form. Like you think about what Deleuze are, what some of the communization theorists will do with MCM. I mean, the way people use this book to like take what is clear, make it weird, and then apply it to things it was never intended to be applied to, and then claim that somehow a reality descriptor is maddening.
Then ignore the things that it was meant to be applied to. It's okay if you apply it to things that it wasn't meant for. Like if you want to do Marxist art theory, okay, cool. But make sure you do Marxist economic theory.
And so this book is really good in that it's reminding me that there's an argument here. It's not nearly as complicated as you think. I mean, like, honestly, most of this book is going through the history of this debate more than it is actually laying out the debate. You lay out the interpretation, which is pretty sound, and like 40 pages. You know? And it's been amazing going back and rereading Capital with this in mind, because I'm literally helping someone else teach a course on Capital Volume 1 right now. And there's all kinds of pitfalls and kind of the weird German wording of Capital Volume 1 that this has helped me understand, even though Kleiman isn't framing it the way I frame it. Like Kleiman doesn't talk about the social in the kind of way I do. But this helped me understand why that was important, because of productivity and temporality being important, and that also being socially relative, and all these things just started fitting together. And so many things that confuse me now just seem like, oh, you didn't understand the argument in the first place, and you've been leading me down a rabbit trail for years.
Woo!
Yep, I hear you. Well, let's see if Rosa's phone is dead yet, or maybe Rosa, are you still alive?
Yeah, I am. I'm at like 31%, so that gives me like what, half an hour, I guess. Yeah.
Any
So
thoughts,
yeah, I mean, I going through this, I still have a bit of a hard time understanding like stuff that should honestly be basic. Like the way he's laying it out, I know it's clear, but it's like the same problem that I had with like algebra in high school. It's like, yeah, it's being laid out clearly, but something is going wrong in my brain. But I'm getting some of the broader strokes, I guess. I appreciate the overall effort by Kleiman to like lay out a interpretation of Marx's theory of value in a scientific manner. I appreciate the overall project with like the interpretation of crisis theory that Kleiman and Michael Roberts and all of them have in terms of like relating it back to empirical evidence, things like that. I appreciate it in like contrast to like sort of like the humanities brain Marxism that is represented by value form theory and like what is generally popular among like the people who go really deep into theory. I'm gonna put that in like scare quotes, theory, or like some kind of like, because like theory is usually separated from like
reality.
yeah reality, even philosophy. Like I don't even know, it's just an academic pitfall at this point. But yeah, I appreciate the overall effort. I appreciate the overall effort, and I appreciate even the efforts of like people like Paul Cockshot, even though he's a transphobic cunt. But I appreciate the overall effort, like trying to move like Marxism towards like a sort of scientific understanding, and like specifically moving towards policy and that sort of thing. I appreciate all of that, and I think that's more useful for the creation of a Marxist research program than what is put out there, what is like gets popular in terms of like theory, like the obsession with Deleuze and that sort of thing. Even though maybe Deleuze can be useful, I'm not certain on that. I've tried reading Deleuze and it was a pain in the ass. But yeah.
Well, one thing I'd say as well is that like the math stuff that is in there, that when we get to dealing with some of the tables, remember that table we had 2.2 as our first table, and it cleared up a lot of things that people had. When we get to, by the time we finish the book, we do a few examples from outside of the book where the tables are all there, the math becomes pretty obvious. It's not feckin' algebra. You know what I mean? It'll end up being a lot simpler.
I mean,
Talking about
it is
all
algebra.
this stuff. Well, you know,
I
basically,
mean, it is literally algebra. I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
You know, like it's not difficult. And when we get our head around what the tables should be saying, like it clears up all this bullshit. You know, and hopefully soon we'll get into an example. I think, from my point of view, the first simultaneous example that I did immediately, I just kind of went, all right, well that's it there. Yeah, I understand that now. You know, and I think we'll get there, Rosa. Don't be too afraid away from the math. Sometimes when you look to the back pages of a book, and some of them the math is in there, but it's not really core to most of the argument. That we'll find out, hopefully, you know, it shouldn't be any more difficult than just doing like business accounting. You know, that's the way I look at it.
I don't do business accounting.
Oh, I know, yeah, but
Rosa, I'd be happy to teach you.
Yeah, I need to take a
Hey,
course. Let's do a business accounting course. I want to take a business accounting.
Yeah,
course.
I'd love to do that for you.
I'm
business
joking.
accounting for Marxists. Like I think that's actually like the best idea. Like as an education effort. Like
I'd be more than happy to do so.
The only thing is, it's really boring, lads.
You know,
say, like
that's
literally
it's all Crumbuses and Schlebe, guys. There's
yes. Just,
right then,
yeah, simoleons.
Let's continue this conversation off air. Is there anybody? We'll give a shout out to the chat. There's been a lot of action in the chat here today. Oh my good sweet Jesus.
Yeah. Oh,
let me give a few people.
So it's good wants to hear Derek on value theory more, or value form theory more.
That's the end of it now.
Yeah, but let's see what else.
Subject me to another text later. We're not talking about it again in context of this book.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to. Right, we got we got these. Right, I'm gonna give these people a shout out. We got LDSK JFHSL KJDHFL KJDHF.
That's
shout out
one.
to you. Yeah,
I don't think that's how you pronounce it.
I'm not sure.
I think it's
okay. Let's have a go. No,
Yeah.
that was your Russian accent. Must be a Russian. Must be a Russian bot. We also have star. Really great fucking names around here. Taylor Chrysler. That is a very American sounding name. Alex, who was on last week's show, is in there.
Alex, hey.
David Solentuna. Data Lore, Delatera making a look in as well. I think that might be the gist of everybody who
Councilcom.
Oh, Councilcom. Oh, good. And did we get anybody in here cutting up the libs? Did we get anybody? Jake P as well. Shout out to Jake P. Councilcom. We had AAAAA. Has been any sight of that?
Oh, any sight of that? No, I don't see any.
Okay, so I think that's everybody in the chat we've shouted out. We're going to try and head for this time next week to reconvene. We'll be tackling chapter 3. So chapter 3 is it long? Let's have a look, see how long it is. Actually, can't be bothered looking.
I don't remember it being long.
Oh, wait, David Solentune. I think that I think Dave I'm not sure, but I think Dave Zachariah lives in Sollentuna. So Sollentuna is a suburb of Stockholm. So it's David from Sollentuna. That could actually be Dave Zachariah. I don't know.
Wait, where?
Yeah.
Strange up there.
Hi,
anyway, okay.
If that's you, hi. And
that's mine to do, Zach, if that's him.
And if it's not, hey David, om du bor I Sollentuna, kom och ta en bärs någon gång.
That's exactly what I thought. Now,
pork.
So, can everybody say a group goodbye? Can we do a group goodbye?
All right. Goodbye, comrades.
Goodbye.
До свидания, спасибо большое.
Bye now. I'm going to stop this. Stop.